Alright, so in this video we're doing Chapter 9 review, so we're just going to be reviewing quadratics. Okay, so we're going to match this graph to the equation. So without doing AOS, maximum, minimum, all that type of stuff, what we can do is just go based on what the equations are. So remember when I said sad face, that means my x squared has to have the negative in front of it. Okay, so I can automatically eliminate. Okay, and that means I can also eliminate this one. Now, it crosses my y-axis here. So if I plugged in 0 to these equations, it should equal this number. Okay, so let's plug in 0 for the first equation. So y equals 1. Okay, that crosses my y-axis at 1. And that plus 1 tells me it shifts up. So that is my answer. Okay, finding the roots, that's finding the solutions or finding the zeros. So we want to know where it's crossing my x-axis. So it's crossing my x-axis at 1, 2, 3, negative 3, and 1, 2, 3, 4, positive 4. So my answers are negative 3 and 4. Okay, solve the equation. Well, to be able to solve the equation, we have to have it set equal to 0. So we're going to subtract this 8x over. And we have to have it written in standard form, okay? This x has to be in the middle. It has to be ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so now we think of two things that multiply to get me negative 33 that add to get me negative 8. Well, 11 and 3 do. Okay, but one of them has to be negative. The 11's negative because negative 11 plus 3 gets me negative 8. Okay, but when we're solving, we got to find the zeros of it. So x minus 11 equals 0, and x plus 3 equals 0. So we got to add 11 on this one to get x equals 11. Oops. And then subtract 3. So we get x equals negative 3. So when we're solving, we'll get those two answers. Okay, we're solving on this one again. So this time I got to move two things over. I got to move my 7x over and my 6. So I'm going to get 5x squared minus 7x minus 6 equals 0. Okay? And I have a number in front of my x squared, so I have to send it back. So I'm going to get x squared minus 7x minus 30. So two things that multiply to get me negative 30 and add to get me negative 7. Well, 3 and 10 do. So we got x, 10, and 3. But when I add them, I need a negative 7. So I have to have a negative 10. Okay, and it's still set equal to 0. But I sent a 5 back, so I have to make sure I divide by 5 and simplify my fractions. So 10 divided by 5 gives me 2. I can't simplify 3 over 5 more, so I have to bring my bottom up. So I'm going to get 5x plus 3 equals 0. Now I can set them both equal to 0. So I'm going to add 2. So x equals 2. Subtract 3. So 5x equals negative 3. Divide by 5, x equals negative 3 over 5. So there are my two roots. Okay, this doesn't have anything to send back, so two things that multiply to get me 63, that add to get me 16. Well, 9 and 7 do, so I have x and 9 and x and 7, and still set equal to 0, and they both have to be positive to give me that positive 16 and positive 63. So then we just set them equal to 0. So subtract 9, x equals negative 9, subtract 7, x equals negative 7. So there are my two answers. Okay, solve by using the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Okay, so in this case, it's not set equal to 0. So we need to make sure we move that 4 over. So I got to add the 4 first. So we get x squared plus 6x plus 4 equals 0. So my a is 1, my b is 6, and my c is 4. So now we can just do our replacing. So my b's in these spots are going to be 6's. My a's are going to be 1's. And my c is going to be 4. So now let's go ahead and solve. So we got x equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root. 6 squared is 36. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. times 4 is negative 16. And then 2 times 1 is just 2. So we get x equals negative 6 plus or minus 36 minus 16 is 20. And now we could either simplify this fraction or we could make it into our two equations. So we got x equals negative 6 plus the square root of 20 over 2, and x equals negative 6 minus the square root of 20 over 2. So when I type this in my calculator for the first one, I'm going to type in negative 6 plus the square root of 20, press my equal sign, then divide it by 2. So I'm going to have x equals negative 0.76, and this one, x equals, I'm going to take negative 6 minus the square root of 20, press enter, divide it by 2, and we'll get negative 5.24. So there are my two answers. Okay, match the graph to the equation above. If I have to the equation to the graph. So now I have the smiley face. See how it makes a smiley face in this graph? Okay, so that means it's going to be a positive in front of my x squared, and it is down at negative 3. So I'm going to x out all the ones that have negative x squared, and I know it's down at negative 3. So this is my answer, because if I plug in 0 for x, I'm going to get negative 3 as my y-intercept.